There's a massive uptick in June of a variety of bigoted, anti-queer hate groups and hate content. And it's simply because it's June. It's Pride Month. You know, the queer community is out loud and proud and has been for a while, you know, steadily been becoming more and more accepted in society. And that's not good for these types of people. It's not good for them because it hurts their feelings. They have no actual legitimate moral objection. They have no actual evidence of any kind of harm being done by queer people simply existing. They just have hurt feelings. They're just triggered. They're just mad. They're just butthurt about the fact that non-cisgender, non-heterosexual people exist. And because of that, they've elevated their rhetoric to literal death threats simply for the crime of existing. But surely the people on the pro-LGBT side of the fence are overreacting. Surely they're the ones that are out of pocket. They're the ones that are a threat to the stability of the country. You know, surely, definitely, that's true. So about a month ago, a really good article that came out about the Libs of TikTok Twitter account, where the account holder was unmasked and a lot of interesting information was gleaned, considering a variety of contacts that the owner of the account happens to have, how the account has literally been cited in the passage of anti-queer legislation in Florida, and has led to a variety of other things, which we'll get into right now. I released this video. Libs at TikTok got unmasked and the right is panicking about a month ago. You can go watch that if you want to catch up on all that information. It'll pop up in the top right corner, you know, the god dang deal. But there's some new stuff that's gone on, which is interesting, and we're going to get into it. So, as it would turn out, there has been a certain amount of pride this month in June, as the time of recording, for the homosexuals. June is apparently the home of the sexuals. It's the queer pride month. And because of this, we've got some more unfortunate consequences of accounts like Libs of TikTok being allowed to continue to do what they do. So, there's a really good article by Parker Malloy. For the present age, the anti-LGBTQ right is going to get people killed. Libs at TikTok, Republican legislators, and right-wing media are putting targets on LGBTQ people's backs. So Parker Malloy writes, on Saturday, 31 people affiliated with the Patriot Front, a right-wing white nationalist group, were arrested en route to an LGBTQ pride event in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. The organization had apparently planned to crash Coeur d'Alene's annual Pride in the Park event, a family-friendly LGBTQ get-together put on by the North Idaho Pride Alliance. Patriot Front is a rebranded offshoot of the Vanguard America, a neo-fascist organization best known for its involvement in 2017's deadly, quote, Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia. Now, you may wonder why a right-wing white supremacist militia group with a history of violence was planning to turn a small Idaho pride event into a riot, driving across state lines and packing dozens of themselves into a U-Haul. Well, I'm going to guess it had at least a little bit to do with a certain Twitter account that started by sharing videos of liberals being cringy on TikTok, as, you know, one should, because liberals do a fair amount of cringe things, but eventually turned into a right-wing harassment and targeting machine, Libs of TikTok. So what Libs of TikTok does is not the cool kind of shaming liberals for being cringe, because usually what they're putting up there is the most mundane shit possible, that because there's queer people involved, the owner of the account gets triggered, and then, as we'll see, goes on to incite others to violence, either indirectly or otherwise. In the days leading up to the event, Shai Reichik, the woman behind the Libs of TikTok account, repeatedly highlighted it. Quote, family-friendly drag dance party being promoted by the Satanic Temple in Idaho. We're living in hell. Yeah, we're certainly living in hell, but it's not because of queer people, I can tell you that. Contrary to what Reichik would have had you believe, the Satanic Temple does not actually worship Satan. The organization is essentially a troll operation meant to fight back against the use of, quote, religious liberty to oppress others. The concept of the religious liberty is that people should be allowed to believe and worship whatever it is they want, but that's not the kind of religious liberty Christian nationalists believe in. Yeah, the Christian nationalists literally believe that we need to mandate by the state everybody being Christian. You have to be a Christian in order to be a citizen. It's, kind of antithetical to some of the beliefs of the founding fathers who made this country possible. But, these people don't care about that. The goal of Satanic Temple is in part to highlight the hypocrisy of, quote, religious liberty arguments by trying to make the people who try to foist Christian beliefs on the contrary feel as uncomfortable as these Christians make non-Christians. But after Reichik put a small account, fewer than 1,500 followers, on blast using her massive account, more than 1.2 million followers, that person deleted their account. Reichik then shared a list of the event's sponsors, which led to the Satanic Temple bailing on the event altogether. But this wasn't really about the Satanic Temple. This is about finding an excuse to attack an LGBTQ event. Right-wingers have been especially focused on drag events in recent months, making them the group's go-to boogeyman. So that's actually very true as well. We went from bathroom bills way back when, some years ago, but now we've moved on to women's sports. It's about the integrity of women's sports that we worry about these trans athletes, which they don't actually care about women's sports. This tale old time. And now it's drag queens, which is weird because drag queens aren't usually trans women. Drag queens usually identify as men, they just, as a part of their drag performance, dress hyper femininely. So they are gender nonconforming, sure, when they're in their performance, but usually they identify as men, and usually they are cis men. But obviously, because it's gender nonconformity, and because these people don't care about truth, facts, logic, or anything like that, they conflate the two to be, oh, all drag queens? Well, that's synonymous with trans people. They're all so-called groomers anyway, which is the catch-all term for literally every queer person and their allies, which is meant to dehumanize and blah, blah, blah. It's very convenient for them because it gives them the ability to pretend that trans people are the same as drag queens, and allows them to play up their groomer line when organizations have family-friendly events. It's led to one Texas lawmaker to propose legislation making it illegal for children to be in the presence of drag queens. Now, that being said, the idea that you would make this a law allows for the expansion of the definition of so-called drag queens to potentially include any gender nonconforming performance. If you have a person that you identify as a man, regardless of how they identify, and they're not in drag, but they are dressing very femininely, gender nonconformingly, well, who's to say that this law wouldn't be used against them? There have been some people proposing making it illegal to dress that way to begin with, making drag illegal. Well, then if you do that, well, then what exactly is drag? How far does this go? Are people allowed to be gender nonconforming anymore? The right certainly doesn't want people to. They might pretend and be like, oh my God, why can't people just be tomboys? Why can't people just be femboys? Why can't you just be a feminine man? Why do you have to be a trans woman? But they pretend to care about those kinds of gender nonconforming people, but they don't. To them, it's all degeneracy. It doesn't matter what you are, it doesn't matter how you identify. If you're doing what is seen to be outside of the normative position in society and the one that they want to force on everybody, then you're going to be considered undesirable and worthy of any kind of prosecution. Knowing this was their easy target ahead of Pride Month, Riot Chicken and her financial backer Seth Dillon, who runs the Babylon Bee, a right-wing quote-unquote comedy site that more or less just tweets versions of quote, trans people are fake, LOL, identify as helicopter jokes, created a mega drag thread to whip her followers up into a lathery rage. Twitter briefly suspended Riot Chick's account. She responded by putting the thread out there in a newsletter. In it, she shared, quote, good news about getting events canceled around the country. So that's the actual goal of this account, and she's pretty clear about that too. She brags when events are canceled, and she talks about how it's, crazy that these events could happen to begin with. Now, the reasons that she gives for that are dubious. They don't actually have any grounds to be problematic the grand majority of times. Like Drag Queen Story Hour is literally just drag queens who are usually, like the overwhelming amount of times, dressed incredibly conservatively, essentially dressing up like Disney princesses would, that go and read books and stories to kids. If the person identified as a woman and was a cis woman, they wouldn't care. But because it's related to queer issues, well, now all of a sudden it's a problem. And the idea behind the account is to scare people into not attending these events, to scare sponsors from not sponsoring the events, to scare companies into not participating in the events, and to get the events canceled. That's the goal of this. And essentially that leads to queer issues and queer people becoming less and less visible, which is their ultimate goal. How not visible they become, is up to their determination. But it wasn't just the Idaho event either. In California, a quote, drag queen storytime event, it's exactly what it sounds like, drag queens read children's books to kids, that was targeted by Riot Chick and others on the right, was disrupted by a group of 8 to 10 members of the pro-Trump Proud Boys group who threatened attendees and performers while shouting homophobic and transphobic slurs. So this is from Joe Fitzgerald Rodriguez on Twitter. It says, new San Francisco drag queen Panda Dolce says the drag queen story hour for kids at San Lorenzo Library today was stormed by people shouting homophobic slurs and hate speech. They allegedly shouted, quote, tranny and, quote, pedophile. I called ACSO sheriffs who confirmed the incident. So this starts with Joe Fitzgerald Rodriguez speaking, asking the question, then eventually the officer at the sheriff's department responds.
Well, we were called to the San
So it's Lieutenant Ray Kenny
for a report of a disturbance at that location. We later learned that a group of individuals who've been described as synonymous with the Proud Boy group entered into the library where there was a LGBT community event going on with book reading, and they disturbed that event and shouted homophobic and anti-LGBT slurs. There was no physical violence. It was mostly verbal and intimidation. We'll be investigating as a possible hate crime, harassment, and harassing and annoying children while they're in a library. So we'll be looking into identify these individuals. As you look deeper into this story, it appears to be hate speech and intimidation of members of our LGBTQ plus community and that's not going to be tolerated.
So that's just really good substantiation that the event did happen and that law enforcement has been informed about it. So the Surfs posted, whom you should follow if you don't already. Libs and TikTok posted the direct location of an LGBTQ event where children were being read stories. The Proud Boys showed up and started screaming slurs at a drag performer, one wearing a shirt that said, "Kill your local pedophile," quote unquote. The children were understandably terrified. So here is that person in question. So if you're wearing a shirt that says, quote, "Kill your local pedophile" with an AR-15 on it, and then you go to a event that includes a assumed queer person, a drag queen, reading children's books to children, and then these people are calling that drag queen a pedophile, I feel like it's not really much of a logical leap to go from those two things to these people either wanted to threaten this person with death, might have potentially had intent to do something, or at the very least just intimidate them that might happen to them. I feel like that's not really that hard to follow. So essentially what seems to be the case is that Libs at TikTok, the account, either wittingly or unwittingly publishes these information, with or without the knowledge that people will then use the information they publish on their Twitter profile and use it for nefarious ends like this. So Libs at TikTok curates a bunch of different queer events, with dubious negative qualities. A lot of the time it's just standard events that don't really have anything wrong going on, like a drag queen reading books at a public library. And then people who see that, who aren't the biggest fans of queer people, will go on to use that information and go expose children to words like the slur for trans people and pedophile. Like, if you thought that simply a drag queen reading books in a public library was going to traumatize children, what do you think shouting transphobic slurs going to do to those kids? Can you imagine the parents having to explain to their kids what those words mean? Because they're going to have to now. And now you're going to expose those kids by doing this to that information. Seems like you're really not helping your case. So I wrote, Libs at TikTok is a stochastic terror outfit, and it seems to be being used in that way regardless of the intent of the account holder. However, the account holder has bragged about the information that she's published being used to get teachers fired and things like this. So I think she's very well aware of the effect her account is having. I'm pretty sure she's fine with it. Libs at TikTok has made accusations against people of crimes with zero evidence, was cited by DeSantis' press secretary in the passage of anti-LGBT legislation, and their posts have been used to direct hate mobs to multiple events. This account should not be allowed to operate on this platform, and that's just my belief. There's a massive uptick in June of a variety of bigoted, anti-queer hate groups and hate content. And it's simply because it's June. It's Pride Month. The queer community is out loud and proud and has been for a while, steadily been becoming more and more accepted in society. And that's not good for these types of people. It's not good for them because it hurts their feelings. They have no actual legitimate moral objection. They have no actual evidence of any kind of harm being done by queer people simply existing. They just have hurt feelings. They're just triggered. They're just mad. They're just butthurt about the fact that non-cisgender, non-heterosexual people exist. And because of that, they've elevated their rhetoric to literal death threats simply for the crime of existing. But surely the people on the pro-LGBT side of the fence are overreacting. Surely they're the ones that are out of pocket. They're the ones that are a threat to the stability of the country. Surely, definitely, that's true. But shockingly, Fox News actually put out a pretty good pro-trans segment about a trans kid from South California. It's Raising Rylan, SoCal Transgender Teen's Journey. It's a pretty good segment from what I've seen, but for some reason, the right wing is really mad about it. Let's find out.
14-year-old Rylan Whittington is a typical Southern California teenager. And the Whittingtons, along with mom Hillary, dad Jeff, and sister Brinley, are a typical family. The only difference...
These people are titanium white, by the way. This is the whitest family I've ever seen. They're literally playing fucking ball and frisbee in their yard. They've got a trampoline and a basketball court. Jesus. This is like the quintessential conservative family.
Whittingtons, along with mom Hillary, dad Jeff, and sister Brinley, are a typical family. The only difference, though, in Rylan's eyes, is what this family can mean to the tens of thousands of kids under 18 who identify as transgender.
We put our story out there so people could see that like there's another family out there that is going through what we're going through, or there's another family who's proud of who they are.
Before Rylan could even speak, he managed to tell his parents that he is a boy.
I could just see it. It wasn't him trying to be a brat. It was like painful. It was truly painful for him to have to wear feminine clothing and for us constantly telling him that you're a girl.
And unlike some trans kids, when Rylan came out at age 5 a few years later, he had the full support of his parents.
Which is literally what people like Libs at TikTok, like Ben Shapiro, like Matt Walsh, like the Republican Party, conservatives generally don't want for kids like this. The goal of the conservative anti-queer project is to make it so that the conditions for LGBT youth and LGBT people in general are so bad that they either stay in the closet, present themselves as straight to not have to deal with the homophobia, or if they are out and loud, be subject to all manner of oppression, hate crimes, intimidation tactics like we've seen, and also to the promotion of negative mental states that a lot of people will feel on the basis of the oppression and bigotry that they face for being queer, which then contributes to self-harm and suicide. That's the goal of the right wing. They want to stop people like Rylan from having supportive parents. They want to promote child abuse of kids. Transphobic parents engage in a myriad of different methods of child abuse for their kids. Kicking their kids out of their house is a big one. Physical or verbal altercations as well, another big one. Literally forcing a kid to go through the incorrect puberty as it pertains to their identity. Very, very problematic for the development of that person. There's a variety of ways that very clearly those things map onto the definition of child abuse, and that's what the right wing wants to promote. Having positive and affirming parents like Ryland has here is antithetical to that worldview that they have.
The full support of his parents.
Initially, there was some pushback from us in trying to understand this.
We were confused like most people are. We thought that gender and sexuality were the same thing. It took us a while.
Then they understood literally basic biology and sociology and understood that they weren't. Imagine that. These people have done leaps and bounds of research and learning to understand the very simple concept of biology and sociology being different fields of study. And the way that we engage with both of these things seem to differ in society.
To figure out that those two things are different and that children actually do recognize their gender identity very young. Some of them, not all.
And one of the reasons why these parents probably had that worldview is just because the education wasn't available to them when they were in school. It's only been recently, in like the last decade or two, that more and more sex ed classes are teaching gender identity as well. So before you just learned basic biology, that's what I had. I was in a fairly conservative area in New Jersey. I just learned biology. I didn't learn anything about gender identity. So I essentially just learned that gender and sex were the same thing, and that, warped my perception of these concepts until I learned more about it through my own learning, right? The reason why these parents had that initial thought process is because that's how a lot of people are taught. They're not taught basic biology or sociology in class in a way that illuminates those very different concepts, gender and sex, and as such, they just don't know. That's literally the part of the project of the conservatives. They want to make it so that people conflate gender identity and biological sex to force people to be cis and to force conditions for queer people who understand basic biology and sociology to be worse because of the bigotry that people learn in school, in church, at home, from their parents. And, it's a losing battle, luckily. It's easier to undo that than to push it on people, because all you have to do is teach people actual facts rather than the feelings-based bullshit that the right teaches. But, obviously it's an uphill battle. It's still difficult.
But they listened to Rylan and to Hillary's conservative faith.
For me, it's just a deep spiritual belief that you believe in God and he, created us the way he wanted us. Well, then yes, he created Rylan just the way he is.
And they listened to families they met in support groups.
There was a father who was sitting across the table. He says, "You have no idea how lucky you are to be here," which kind of took me back. I didn't at that point consider myself lucky to be there. And he said, our child had displayed this gender dysphoria or this gender misalignment at the same age that Rylan has. And we didn't listen, and we pushed back.
That pushback led that child to turn to self-harm as a teenager.
Hey, that's what I've been saying is a problem. Huh. Crazy.
60% of trans and non-binary kids engage in, according to the Trevor Project. More than 50% consider suicide.
That for me was the turning point. I didn't want to see Ryland go through that.
Yeah, wow. Imagine these parents who actually love their kids, who learned actual facts, that don't care about your feelings, learned that pushing back on, being bigoted to, being hateful to your own fucking kids over their identity that they cannot change, leads those kids to consider self-harm and suicide. And they were like, oh shit, I don't hate my kid, so I don't want them to have to go through that, so I'm not gonna be a fucking piece of shit to them. Real, shocking. The fucking leaps and bounds and absolute fucking academic understanding of all these. They probably don't even have an academic understanding of this shit that they needed to understand that not being hateful to your kids, that actually loving your kids makes those kids less likely to hate themselves and want to kill themselves. Wow.
That for me was the turning point. I didn't want to see Ryland go through that.
I'd rather have a living son than a dead daughter.
She said, I'd rather have a living son than a dead daughter. Unfortunately, a lot of conservative parents can't say the same. And it's sad, man. Because, that level of understanding of your kid, that level of love for your kid should be the standard for parents. I want my child to live the best life they possibly can. But because your political worldview conflicts with their identity, you subject them to abuse, to ridicule, you kick them out of the house, or worse. Come on now. You can't be a good parent and be this way. This is actual good parenting. It's being displayed on Fox News somehow.
I guarantee that if we had pushed back and done what a lot of parents do, I don't think that we would have either one of the kids that you see before you here today.
Allowing him to live authentically and true to himself and be who he really feels like he is. When you get to know Ryland, you see just how proud and confident he is of himself.
I never thought that I would be known for this as well as I am, but really it's just a small part of who I am.
He just brushes things off his shoulders it's fine. He moves on in his life and he's just kind of, I think everything we've been through, he's just learned to do that and he's really good at it. I could never do that.
And that's what I call being a man, brother. You get shit, you just dust your shoulders off, you rub some dirt in it and you move on. That's how you know Ryland's actually a boy. Girls can't do that. Too emotional.
Child's life, something they learned from that support group father nearly a decade ago.
I'm just here to make the ride smoother for others. You might be struggling right now, but we believe in you. This family, we might not know you, we might not know where you live, but we understand you and we believe in you.
What extraordinary courage displayed by Ryland, his sister Brinley, father Jeff, and mom Hillary. I want to thank the Whittington family for speaking to us. It's not easy, particularly at a time when transgender issues have been politicized. People are afraid of...
Trans issues have been politicized as well. I've never heard an actual good argument against a variety of the pro-trans stuff that I talk about. I haven't. It's usually just a bunch of emotionally charged bullshit and misunderstanding. A misunderstanding on their part of the facts.
What they do not understand, Dana, this family hopes their story will lead to more understanding, more acceptance, and ultimately more...
So, of course, this very humanizing and empathetic accounting of the life of a trans youth is certainly going to upset the worst people on the internet. So we've got both Ben Shapiro and Matt Walsh here. So this is June 10th from Ben Shapiro. This would be absolute despicable, insane lunacy if I saw it on CNN or MSNBC. To see it on Fox News is a complete betrayal of anything even remotely resembling conservatism or decency. Every element of this video is propagandistic, dangerous garbage. The report states that this biologically female child was choosing her gender before she could speak. This is madness. The report further states that Ryland's parents began social transition at the age of 5. This is child abuse. The vast majority of children who display signs of gender dysphoria desist over time. Source? By the way, it's social transition. You just start using a different name, different pronouns, and maybe they dress in boys' clothes instead of girls' clothes. How is that child abuse? The real child abuse is everything I've just described before about how transphobic parents usually engage with their trans kids, with their trans youth in their household. The report is absolute horrifying propaganda. We've got mom citing her, quote, Christian faith to justify the perversion of biological identity. We've got the radical gender theory activist Trevor Project starts claiming that childhood transition is the only way to prevent suicide. The radical gender theory activist Trevor Project, the organization whose primary goal is to stop kids from killing themselves, is apparently a radical gender theory activist group. You know, it really makes you think when people like this decide to target a group that's literally built around stopping kids from doing self-harm and killing themselves. Yeah, the Radical Anti-Suicide Project. Like, that's the group you're gonna target. I'd rather have a living son than a dead daughter is, again, propagandistic sloganeering. There is no credible evidence that transition alleviates suicidal ideation among children who identify as LGBTQ. This is literally just a lie. This is literally just a lie. We've talked about it a lot on this channel before. Luckily, resident Data Mail, Socked and Left, brought us the facts and figures, you know, that don't care about Ben Shapiro's feelings. This is a blatant lie from Ben Shapiro. That evidence exists, and it supports affirming trans teens. There are two big questions. Does social transition reduce trans teen suicidality? And I'll link to this in the description as well. Does medical transition reduce trans teen suicidality? For decades, the available evidence has said yes for trans adults, and recent evidence says yes in trans adolescents too. Social transition, parental affirmation works. Durwood McLaughlin Olson, 2017, among 63 socially transitioned trans youth, 9 to 14 years old, who had affirming parents, so that's socially transitioned, rates of depression and anxiety were not significantly higher than matched controls or sibling peers. Social transition, social affirmation works. Among 74 trans youth, 15 to 21 years old, each additional context where one can use one's chosen name, homeschool, work with friends, correlated with 29% lower suicidal ideation and 56% lower suicidal behavior. Medical transition. Rightists often pretend that literal children are getting sexual reassignment surgeries, SRS, such as vaginoplasty, phalloplasty, and mastectomy. That's wrong for the vast majority of patients in the USA and worldwide. In the USA, medical transition for children usually looks like puberty blockers, beginning at Tanner stage 2, around 9 years. Medical transition for adolescents looks like hormone replacement therapy, HRT, beginning around 16 years. SRS is nearly always reserved for adults. And that makes sense too, right? Like if you're gonna do SRS, you kind of have to have the body grow and progress to the point where you can actually do it. It's not done on children. Medical transition. Puberty blockers work. Turbin et al. 2020, among 20,619. Wait, is this a typo? 20,000? Holy shit, that's a lot. Among 20,619 trans adults, 18 to 36 years old, 2.5% reported puberty blocker use in adolescents. That segment reported 0.3 times as much lifetime suicidal ideation as those who wanted but could not receive puberty blockers. There's a whole bunch more. Medical transition, puberty blockers are safe. Puberty suppression is temporary and reversible. Given time for adolescents to decide their gender, they've long been used to treat precocious puberty in all kids, but even cis youth, show no long-term side effects. So precocious puberty is when a person is going through puberty way too early to a point where it would be detrimental to their body. So the doctor will prescribe puberty blockers that block the puberty from happening until you get to the point in that youth's life that is now normal for them to go through puberty. Then you take them off the puberty blocker and then they just go through puberty then. So when you have a trans youth on a puberty blocker, well then if it turns out that, oh no, I'm not actually trans, I'm cis, you know, I had these thoughts, but now I'm more solid in my identity that I am cis, I am the gender I was assigned at birth, you take them off the puberty blocker, and then they go through a late puberty. No long-term side effects. Medical transition, HRT works. Huber et al. 2020, among 148 trans youth, 9 to 18 years old, taking hormone replacement therapy, 83% reported mental health improved, and suicidal ideation, suicide attempt, and non-suicidal self-injury decreased at both 1 to 3 months and 18-plus month follow-up. HRT is irreversible, so is puberty. The choice to delay hormone therapy is as serious as the choice to start them, because withholding may allow for irreversible pubertal development that could worsen psychological outcomes. In summary, evidence suggests that social transition reduces depression and suicidality for trans teens. Evidence suggests that medical transition, both puberty blockers and HRT, reduces depression and suicidality for trans teens. Ben Shapiro has the smallest brain on earth. True and real. Also, we got a bunch of sources from the Data Mail. But, you know, of course, you know, facts and feelings, they have a funny relationship. We've got Dad talking about living authentically by hormonally transitioning a biological female child, transition that if continued will result in biological sterilization and or breast and genital mutilating surgery. So my question is about the genital mutilating surgery. I am against circumcision. Circumcision is, for those of you who don't know somehow, when a child is incredibly young, like an infant, they remove the foreskin from the penis for literally no reason. Like, what's often cited is usually like cleanliness, like hygiene, but that's not a problem if you teach a person how to clean themselves in the bath or in the shower. Doesn't become an issue. Like, so people like Ben Shapiro will simultaneously talk about how, you know, certain Muslim majority countries are doing female genital mutilation and at the same time be okay with male genital mutilation, circumcision. Like, it doesn't make any sense. There's something going on here. Like, you necessarily, if your view is that trans people shouldn't have any kind of sexual reassignment surgeries, then you necessarily have to be against circumcision. And if you're not, then I question the authenticity of your beliefs. And this is happening on Fox News, where the family is praised for its, quote, extraordinary courage in the face of politicization of transgender issues. Yeah, it's literally what you're doing, by the way. Like, he knows this, too. I think Ben Shapiro is legitimately a smart person. I don't think he's stupid. I think he just plays dumb. He understands that the propaganda that he pushes is very beneficial to him. It's allowed him to build a brand. And, you know, the Daily Wire, which is a rag that pulls in a lot of money for him, and he's living comfortably. He understands this, so he keeps along pushing that propaganda because, you know, it's his career. The unfortunate side effect of that is that his hateful bullshit hurts people. Now, I do think he's legitimately hateful, don't get me wrong, but I do think he's aware of that. I think he's aware of the fact that what he talks about is contradictory to the actual facts of the matter, is not logical in any possible way, but he does it anyway. Maybe I'm being too charitable, though. He could just be a fucking dumbass. Fox News is too important to conservatives to be weaponized on behalf of the most radical leftist propaganda imaginable. Propaganda that aims directly at the mental and physical health of children. They should terminate whomever is responsible for this agitprop abomination. Okay, dude. He's just mad. Like, he's pissed. He is seething about the fact that there is a trans kid out there, a trans youth out there, that has affirming parents. He is mad that the parents of Rylan don't hate him. He's mad that this kid has not yet commit suicide. Like, what do you want, Ben Shapiro? Like, do you want the Fox News program
Walking down the street
to be like, oh, you know, here's a story about how this kid was literally killed by his own parents or kicked out of the house? Is that better for you? Like, what is the other prescription? To abuse the child mentally, emotionally, verbally, or physically? Is that what you want the parents to do? It almost like it is. The prescription that a lot of these people, like Matt Walsh, like Ben Shapiro, give for parents if their child comes to them in a very vulnerable moment saying that they have, you know, questions about their gender identity is literally child abuse. Call them a fucking idiot, to say they don't know anything, and to force them into the gender roles as it was assigned to them at birth. That's it. And then usually those parents will go on to do more than that, which is why rates of suicidality in queer youth is so high, which is why rates of homelessness in queer youth is so high, because of the abuse they are subject to by the people around them, not because of some inherent characteristic that happens to be going on in the minds of these queer people, but because of the oppression that they face at the hands of broader society and also their loved ones, which is the goal. That's what they want. That's what people on the right want. They want to create the conditions in society to force everybody back in the closet out of their own self-preservation. They don't care if queer people kill themselves because they don't necessarily care that queer people exist. In fact, I don't know that they necessarily want them to. At least that's what their rhetoric seems to draw to. It's the people we're dealing with, man. They disagree with the literal medical consensus and scientific consensus on the issue. They disagree with all the stats that suggest that affirming trans youth makes them less likely to kill themselves or self-harm. They just want to force everybody from the out group, trans people, queer people, into the in group, cis people, heterosexual people. That's what they want. They want to indoctrinate kids into having that view so that those kids don't understand their own identity, which makes them part of the in-group. It's almost like we've got a word for this. I went over it in the previous video. But luckily, there are parents out there like Rylan has. There are parents out there that are willing to understand the actual facts of the matter, are willing to take their children seriously out of the empathy and love that they have for their kids. The fact that Rylan's parents don't fucking hate him has led Rylan to have the good life that he has. And that's going to keep happening unless the right wing gets their way. The goal of the right wing is to make it so that these kids have terrible lives and either end up, you know, living a lie about their identity or worse. So luckily, we're in an upward trajectory. Luckily, more and more people are becoming okay with, as they learn more about and become more educated about queerness in general. Rates of acceptance for queer people are going up. Rates of acceptance for trans people are going up. And that's why we're seeing such a push by people like Ben Shapiro, Matt Walsh, the politicians Greg Abbott, Ron DeSantis, against queer people. It's the cost of winning, folks. Believe me, we're going to win so much, it'll make your head spin. Believe me, you're going to get tired of winning. That's the cost of winning. The cost of the culture, the cost of the zeitgeist, the cost of society becoming more accepting of people just living their lives, that as it differs from the normative position, is that the people that don't like that are going to become more violent as a result, because their feelings are going to get hurt, and then they're going to lash out. Unless we get to the point where legislation like it's being pushed and passed becomes a more consistent and, you know, countrywide phenomenon. Ideally, if we can beat that back, solidify civil rights for queer people broadly, to make it so that as a society we achieve equality for all oppressed people at some point, but certainly for queer people in this specific context, then, you know, it's going to be even harder for them to chip away at it. And, you know, that's the hopeful future that you're going to have to look toward and fight toward. We may not see the day that that's actually the reality we live in, because it's a constant fight. But that's the reason why you fight, to increase the probability that that is the future that future generations will get to enjoy. That's the civil rights fight in a nutshell, really. How did this make it in the Fox News? I have no fucking idea. Seems to be a sleeper agent pushing a trans agenda in Fox News. But, like, if anybody in the Fox News viewership saw this, like, this video has been perfectly crafted to appeal to white conservative America. Like, this is the whitest family you'll ever see. So, if it moved any of those people to be more accepting, then hell yeah. I hope so. But why Fox News? They have done so much damage? Yeah, well, this is a person, they're putting, whoever made the decision to do this reporting and air it on Fox News is attempting to undo some of that damage. You understand that, right? Like, there's a variety of people that watch Fox News that may not have seen this story if it was only being published on, like, CNN or MSNBC. Anyway.